Hi, I wanted to come on and share another entry. And so this entry I titled Inside Out. And the quote for this entry, it says, as long as we remain vigilant at building our internal abundance, an abundance of integrity, an abundance of forgiveness, an abundance of service, an abundance of love, then external lack is bound to be temporary. And that quote is by Marianne Williamson. Thank you so much for that. So this entry, I actually wrote it after watching the Pixar movie Inside Out. So yeah, Inside Out. And it so Inside Out, I'll kind of go into it just a little bit here. I actually wrote about it, but basically, you know, I didn't even realize when they made that movie, they had like gathered together a group of psychologists and really tried to show how the brain actually works as far as our emotions and the processing and things like that. I didn't realize so much went into the actual movie to bring our cerebral functioning into a screen. I didn't really realize that, but that's what it was. So when it brought me to like inner child as well, because the movie had focused on a little girl named Riley, and so it got me thinking about inner child. And so when I looked up inner child, one of the definitions, it says the inner child is an individual's childlike aspect. It includes what a person learned as a child before puberty. The inner child is often conceived as a semi independent subpersonality subordinate to the walking conscious mind. And that inner you, that little inner you, basically. But it's like, yeah, I had never really thought about it in this way. So I really like the definition of this this definition of the inner child, actually. And so, yeah, Inside Out. And it brought me to, I saw like a list online. And as I said, sort of many times now at this point, but I am learning how to reparent in a lot of ways. And so one of the lists that I had came across online, it was titled what let me see here. It was titled What We Want from Parents. And I'm not sure, I had took a screenshot so I wasn't able to see like who made the list and things like that. So I'm so sorry, because I like to sort of say who wrote something. So I apologize about that. But the list, I'll kind of go over it really really quickly. But I think it's important because I'll just say why. But yeah. So what we want from parents, and it's about a child's perspective as far as like what they look for, what they look to get from us as parents, you know? And it really opened my eyes to really see that in a different perspective. So the first thing was showing is better than telling. I learned by watching you. And that's so true. Our kids watch everything that we do. And so it's it's about being the best example as much as possible, and learning how to become a better example, which takes some growth and that whole thing. And then the second one says, love me. Give me hugs and kisses because you can't spoil me with those. And so the reason, and one of the reasons also too, before I go on with the list here, why I thought about the whole inner child thing is because we all have an inner child. And many people are going through their healing processes, which is like healing the inner child actually, and restructuring their brain and restructuring the way they behave and things like that. But it's a lot of things coming from having to do that inner work and inner healing. And so as adults, if we neglect that inner child and suppress and don't really go into that, it can lead to a lot of challenges in adulthood as we get older, right? And I thought, even though this list was referring to what a child would look from a parent, it still speaks to our inner self and our inner being and who we are and the things that we still require as adults, you know? So that's why I also wanted to go over the list as well, especially adults who are going through their inner child healing right now and working through that. So with the whole love me part, I took a pause too, because it brought me to this video I had saw, and there was this lady, and I really admire her vulnerability and what I didn't quite understand everything she was saying at the time, but now I get it. But she was talking about, and she was in tears because she was talking about how she misses actual physical contact and receiving hugs, and how she's touch deprived, and in that she misses that physical connection with another human being, another adult, and not from a child necessarily, but an actual another adult. And I didn't quite get it at the time, but now I'm starting to understand it more and more, the importance of the physical touch and things like that, as far as how parents give affection to our children, yes, but also why as adults we require that, and why it's also important. And I'm sure many people have heard, like, if a newborn baby would die if it's not touched and held, you know. But as adults, we still need that physical touch, and we maybe don't realize how important it is. And so the one way that I can now see how important that is because since I've become celibate, and decided to do that, it's like, in what ways do you now connect physically with another person? In what ways do you do that? And so I think that's why it's important to remain in connection with people, in terms of learning how to be affectionate with others and learning how to give hugs and show affection to others. And I think that can be challenging, especially if you're more stoic and not affectionate, which is how a lot of people are and were raised in some households, actually. And so when they grow older, they're sort of deprived from that, and they maybe don't even realize it. But yeah, and so now I also understand too the importance of getting a massage, you know, because it's that physical touch that we actually need. And there are some other practices, I think, that involve physical touch, which I think would be helpful as well. But I only started to understand that when I became celibate, because it got me to thinking about, okay, well, celibacy is something that I've taken very seriously. And when I think about the other people in the world, men or women, who are also on their celibacy journey as well, you have to really think about what that means. And it's like, you are saying that you will not be physically intimate intimate that way with another individual unless you are married. But then it also brings into play, like, well, what if one never gets married? You have to really consider that. Yeah. So it's about how do you get physical contact, and that is good like healthy contact, and it doesn't violate any boundaries and things like that. But how do you still get that fulfillment and get that need met outside of a sexual space is what I'm saying. So the importance of physical touch, yeah, that's important to a child as well as an adult is what I'm saying. All right, I'll move on from that point. So it says the third point is kind and firm discipline. It says my brain is still developing, and so I'm slow in learning, but I do want to learn if you patiently and kindly teach me. And so this is what I think God does with us as adults. And I think what it is that God, and I had just done a video about being too independent and thinking you don't need God, but I think God gives us the harsh lessons sometimes, and the discipline and the challenges to discipline us. And we might not like the situation or circumstances, but we will come to appreciate the lesson maybe at a later time, but it's for a reason, to teach us how to be more like him and to be more righteous and right standing. So I think that's the whole point. And that's why I also think that's the whole point of like why the Bible says to be like a child. Except you become like a child. It's because God is trying to transform us from the inside out. I'll move on here. The fourth point is be my safe haven. Kids need to feel safe. As adults, we also need to feel safe. So it goes both ways. The next point says talk with me. Don't just talk at me. The next point says hear me. Sometimes I just want to be heard without judgment or lecture. That's why I think it's so important to be in connection with other people and have good friends or a good network to be able to talk to people, a good therapist. I think those things are really helpful for healing and helpful for one's own mental health and even physical health. I think it's so important because the mind and body are connected. So being able to speak freely and talk without worrying about being criticized is something that's really important for everybody to have that sort of space. I think it's really, really important. And then the next point says, accept who I am. Don't constantly compare me to other kids. Now, again, I think we should do this for our children, yes, but when I think about an adult healing their inner child and how we often compare ourselves to others, we do that a lot. And a lot of people often have a hard time accepting themselves as they currently are, and even as they're going through their growing. And so learning to accept yourself is something that can be a challenge. So yeah. And the next point says, let me play outside. And I just added on to that, I understand now the importance of going out to get sunlight and fresh air. Again, I'll just mention really quickly, I used to be very, very, very depressed. Like, very depressed. I didn't really want to go outside. I like darkness. Just very, very, very depressed. And it's also, and I also talked about too, I used to work like 12-hour night shifts. So I really had blackout curtains. And so sunlight was like not even a thing, really, actually. Not really. So now I'm starting to understand the importance of going out to get some fresh air. If I'm in the house, opening up the blinds, getting some sunlight and some fresh air coming into the house, going out to take walks, putting my feet in the grass and sitting down in the grass. I'm understanding the importance of trying to be connected to nature as much as possible. Also, along with that is like eating foods that come from the ground, more vegetables and fruits and things like that. So the importance of being connected to nature is what I'm getting, that also nourishes our inner, is what I've gathered to be super important as well. And the next point, as I sort of just said, is give me yummy and nutritious food. So there you go. But yeah, and these are things that we should be doing as a parent, but for our children. But these are also things that, again, an adult could be doing to nourish their inner child. And so, again, it's not, it seems probably really basic to some people, but it didn't really come full circle to me until I started my healing journey, to be honest. So, and acknowledging that I needed to heal. So, again, it just kind of came together for me over time. But the next point, there's only two more. The next point says, trust me. Let me make my own decisions on non-safety or health-related things. I couldn't learn to walk without falling. I can't learn to make good decisions without making bad ones. So I added onto this that this point here that says, trust me, it's also the importance of willing to be able to trust your inner voice and listen. Some might say intuition, but it's trusting your inner voice of what decisions you should make or what you want to try. And it's about being willing to try new things. You know, I think that's really, really important. Trusting yourself to try new things and to be different. I think that's really important. And also, I added to that, accepting mistakes made and moving on. So it's like, if you try something new and it doesn't work out, that's also okay. It's just the important thing that you try. And if you don't try things and be willing to learn, then you can't really grow. So yeah. And the last point, it says, don't be afraid to try. No, sorry. The last point says, encourage me. Your praise means so much to me. So like, just as that mom or dad would be cheering on their kid at a soccer field or whatever, and how we affirm our children and tell them good job and high fives and things like that, an adult needs that same thing. And so it's about empowering yourself and picking and choosing what you want to watch and listen to nurture yourself and affirm yourself and build up yourself, that inner confidence to live the fullest you. So I just think it's so important. Yeah, and it's also too about having a positive self-talk. That's something that I'm learning to change, because it's something that can creep in terms of the internal dialogue and internal conversations you have with yourself, and intentionally switching that off to say something positive instead of a negative thing to yourself, or say a doubtful thing to yourself and flipping it to a positive thing. It's changing that inner conversation in your mind about your life and what you can do and what, what's possible and things like that. And even what you think about yourself is so important. So empowerment, changing the inner dialogue, things like that. And then, there was this lady, I think her name is Robin. I'm not sure of her last name, but I saw a little clip from her one time, and she was talking about when you get in the mirror, when you wake up, it's like looking in the mirror and giving yourself a high five. And so, if that works for you, do it. But it's about, how you treat yourself and nourishing your inner child to heal. And so, I thought those 11 points were really, really effective in terms of looking at how I can bring that into my parenting as well, but then also how I can nourish my inner child. I thought that was really, really such a nice list. And so the movie Inside Out, really, really quickly, I won't talk about the entire movie, but the whole point of why I titled that too was because in the movie, there were like the characters, right? Which were the feelings. So there was like joy and um so Riley was the little girl and she was the main character, right? And then there was like and um joy and anger and disgust and all these the feelings, right? But what I had written down here in my notes here was that I said in the movie Inside Out, it talks about how the feelings in Riley's head, um, and it talks about the core memories that come from an important time in our life or an event, and it is essentially it essentially powers our personality. These core memories are things that ideally could that we would like to be positive because they make deposits into our personality compartments. Like for example, if your parents saw you take a cookie from the cookie jar and they asked you, "Did you just take a cookie from the jar?" The moment as a kid could be kind of scary, right? If your parent just caught you taking something and they asked you like, "Did you just take it?" And sometimes as parents, we know you just did something, but we're asking anyway. It's like that. But as a child, like in the moment, you were like, "Okay, I'm busted." But it's like the kid has a moment right there to either tell the truth or lie, right? They have that option. And so in the moment, dependent it's like if that kid chooses to be honest or lie, it makes a deposit into their personality compartment, right? That event turns into a core memory, and how that child responds to that question makes a deposit into their personality, right? Which builds character. So it might seem like a really small and simple example, but if you take that child who was dishonest in that scenario and they said, "No, I didn't take a cookie," but they actually did, this is a small example, but what it does was that if you take that same child and turn that child into an adult, and if they build up that pattern of lying and maybe even stealing and things like that, that small cookie jar example turns into a larger scale when they live a life and are they they burglarize people and things like that. So it's every decision as a child, it's it affects and shapes us more than what we think, and every event can make a deposit into our personality in a good way or a bad way. So, yeah, and it's like I had said here that the earlier core memories seem like they contain the information that is deposited in us and our personality makeup to define our character and who we show up as in the world. In the movie, the feelings character in the movies, the feelings characters were joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. They all had a role to play, but they also had to be managed and so that no one feeling controlled Riley. So all the feelings had a purpose and they needed to exist, but it was important that no one feeling overruled to control Riley, which was a little girl. So it's about just as an adult going through my journey here, and I'm learning that healing inner child and then also reparenting and things like that. And it's also interesting too as a parent because I'm able to now see how it's interesting. How do I want to? I wish I could just say it in my head how I feel it, but it's like it's interesting to see as an adult how wrong some of the environments that you were in as a parent and some of the things as a child and some of the things you may have experienced as a child, right? And then when you have a child or you maybe are taking care of children and you're now able to see how you behave and how you respond, and how maybe your interaction was nothing like that as a child. It's really, really interesting to see that. Um, and it's also, it creates a sense of fulfillment and joy to know that you're also changing it and getting it right and doing things better. And you have that space to do that with your own child, or maybe some children you're looking after or have taken in, or things like that. So it's also having that opportunity to be different and show love different, and have that experience. So I think that's a really beautiful thing as well. So yeah, Inside Out. But yeah, I would recommend the movie. I mean, even if you're an adult, why not? But yeah, I just thought I would come on here to share that. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.